Sometimes it's the candy dish at your grandparents' house, and sometimes it's the candy at the bank. Sometimes it's the candy you forgot you loved until you see it again in a random candy shop on a road trip. And suddenly, you're 8 years old again. Welcome to Pop Culture Passport, your ultimate guide to quirky and cool destinations across the US. I'm your host, Beth Scalacci, aka the Roman Yeti, here to help you dive into the world of theme parks, uncover film and TV locations, and explore quirky museums, roadside attractions, and legendary venues that capture the heart and soul of this unique country. So grab your pop culture passport and let's discover destinations that resonate with your interest, not just with what's trending on social media. Are you ready? Let's roam! Welcome back. As you know, that sound means today we're opening the Snack Society Snack Files, where we look at history, nostalgia, and stories behind the snacks we think we already understand. And today we're talking about something that feels incredibly simple on the surface, but actually carries centuries of history. Our little beloved piece of hard candy. I'm talking about that candy that lived in glass bowls on coffee tables and showed up in coat pockets, church purses, and waiting room dishes. The candy you may not have asked for, but you were always happy to have it in your hand and give it a try. Because long before candy was about branding or novelty, it was about preservation. Sugar itself was expensive. It was imported and deeply tied to global trade routes. For most of human history, sweetness wasn't something people experienced every day. It came from fruit or from honey, but even that honey required, some time and labor and maybe a little bit of risk to harvest. When refined sugar began moving through global trade networks, it didn't immediately become a pantry staple. It appeared first in port cities, in wealthy households, and apothecaries. Now, sugar wasn't just food, it was status and even sometimes medicine. And boiling sugar was delicate, technical work. Early confectioners didn't have the thermometers or standardized equipment, but they were still able to understand the temperature stages, that soft crack, that hard crack, and how moisture or oils and extracts behaved under heat. And in many ways, these early candy makers were like closer to food chemists than bakers. And it wasn't just, this hard candy wasn't just made, it was actually like engineered because of the process. So today we're going to take a look at hard candy, not just as a snack, but as a timeline. And we'll start with Gibraltar candy and early American candy craft. Move into candy, and then we have to talk about the candy bowl era of, of some of our favorites out there. So, like I said, early sugar candies were a way to preserve sweetness, stabilize the ingredients, and transport flavor across distance. And for centuries, sugar was that luxury item, and it was tied to shipping routes. Um, and candy wasn't an everyday food. It was seasonal, it was often special, um, and sometimes it was even medicinal. But hard candy specifically lasted, and it didn't spoil easily, it didn't melt as quickly as chocolate, it could be flavored with oils and spices and extracts. So it's really that thing that, sort of evolved with how trade and, sugar in this country happened. So, one of the coolest American examples of early candy craft is, Gibraltar candy. And if you listened to my episode last week on candy stores, you heard me talk about the Ye Olde Pepper Candy Company in Salem, Massachusetts. It's often called the oldest candy company in America, and, Gibraltar candy is deeply tied to that history and dates back to the early 1800s. And it's often described as one of the first commercially sold, candies in the US. And as we know, in the 1800s, Salem was one of the most globally connected cities in the country. Ships traveled to Asia, Caribbean, Europe, and they brought back spices and textiles and teas. Um, so that made it easier to make the candies in port cities because they had access to these ingredients coming off the boats. Now, if you zoom in a little bit, like it's not hard to imagine what it might have looked like in real life, like a small kitchen in Salem in like 1820. And there's probably one of those big copper kettles over an open heat, and there's no thermometer for the candy maker to be checking. They're just watching the bubbling of the of the syrup. They're watching for a color change. Maybe even, smelling the scent as it gets closer to the right stage that they want it. And meanwhile, outside, the ships are coming in and out of port with spices and teas and sugars from around the world. And it's really, that's just how candy was made then. And it's really cool to think about. Peppermint, which was one of the most common flavors, wasn't just a flavor choice, but it was connected to herbal medicine traditions and was already associated with digestion and fresh breath, and mild soothing properties. So the early candy makers weren't really chasing a novelty with peppermint. They wanted to use flavors that people already knew and were trusted. Um, and Gibraltar candy is like simple by what we think. There's peppermint, sometimes a lemon. It's hard, it's dense, it's long lasting. But like that simplicity reflects early American candy culture. And it's really interesting to think about how difficult the process was in something that, you know, we have candy thermometers in our households now and can make um, those kind of similar candies right at home. So, if Gibraltar candy represents early American practicality, the rock candy represents wonder. And you know the rock candy I'm talking about. It's actually existed globally for centuries, but it really found a cultural foothold in the US during the late 1800s and early 1900s because it like sat at the intersection of science, education, and it was visually beautiful. Um, Rock candy is, sugar crystals grown slowly over time. Teachers, I mean, how many science fairs have have used it to demonstrate crystal formation? Pharmacies sold it both as candy and throat-soothing lozenges, and candy shops displayed it in the window because, like I said, it's visually striking. You can add colors, flavors, but this was also the Victorian era, sorry, not area. This was the Victorian era, and it was a period where science, discovery, and public fascination with the natural world were exploding. And people went to exhibitions to see new inventions and scientific demonstrations, and the rock candy just fit perfectly into that culture of curiosity. It wasn't something you just ate, it was something you observed first. And in in many ways, rock candy was sort of the earliest example of, candy and food becoming experiential, not just, about flavor, but by, like, the looks and the spectacle of it all. Now, I need to start talking about the candy bowl era. So, in s in the mid-1900s, something shifted dramatically, and in many of the travel stories and timelines I've told, um, that dramatic shift is after World War II, when the entire American food system, travel, road system, like everything's changed. Um, Industrial food production expanded, packaging was improving, distribution networks were speeding up. As we know, highways were expanding, the suburbs were growing, so the candy sort of shifted from occasional food to that household staple. And hard candy really fit perfectly into that mid-century life. It was inexpensive enough to buy, a fair amount, and it was shelf stable for months. It was easy to keep in a bowl or dish, it was safe to hand to kids, and it didn't require refrigeration or, air conditioning. Plus, let's face it, the packaging and the product, it was pretty, it looked really nice in a bowl. And again, you can almost picture the environment where this really took hold. Your mid-century American living room in a late afternoon, there's a candy dish on that coffee table, and it's, probably cut glass, maybe something from a wedding or an anniversary gift. Inside, there's that mix of hard candies, a mint, a butterscotch, a strawberry, root beer, like, again, all those sort of pretty jeweled colors almost. Um, and it was just something sort of small and sweet that quietly said to guests, like, "You're welcome here." It was like an everyday hospitality that was built into how people lived, and, it just sort of fit that rhythm of our life, and it's definitely a memory for many of us. Um, and this is also where we saw sort of that rise of what we can call hospitality candy, like, it wasn't just for yourself, it was for your visitors, and I think that's why so many people associate hard candy with, like, grandparents and churches and banks and, yes, doctors' offices, and front desk. It wasn't a luxury anymore, it was sort of about comfort and, welcoming people into your house or your business. So, I just wanna quickly mention, 3 popular hard candies that, I adore and I know other people adore. The first are those strawberry candies, that are wrapped in that strawberry. The wrapper looks like a strawberry. And they're almost fascinating because apparently there's no real brand associated with them. Um, they were, bulk manufactured. Were sold in restaurant supply chains, and they don't really belong to one company. They belong to, like, places. Um, and so you probably remember, like, where you ate 'em. I know I remember where I found them. I remember them being in, Hickory Farms gift boxes at Christmas time. And I would like, my grandma would have a box or something, man, I didn't care about the sausage or the cheese, I just wanted those, like, strawberry, candies, and, they had to have that liquid inside, a little bit of strawberry liquid, again, like, there's no brand, I couldn't find a brand associated with it, so, they were just that product out there that, you forget about until you see that wrapper again. And butterscotch discs are also another candy dish icon, and that flavor dates back into the UK. Um, it was the brown sugar and butter and caramelized and comforting and, oh, all the good things. And it became, very common and very popular in the US. It's not really the flashiest thing, but it was just predictable and it has sort of an emotional value. There's both sort of the generic ones, and then there's, like, the Werthers, um, which are much better, let's face it. If someone pulls a Werther's out of their pocket and hands it to you, like, that is they care about you. Like, that's that's showing love and emotion for sure. Now, last but not least, I have to mention the root beer barrels, which is uniquely American. Many early sodas that came from pharmacies were sold as tonics or digestive aids, and root beer, sarsaparilla, and cola all came from herbal and medicinal traditions. So turning those flavors into candy really extended the pharmacy culture into everyday life, and it allowed, people to carry those flavors with them, sort of that portable, f soda stand, nostalgia. And as you can see, like, hard candies aren't flashy, but I think it really comes down to the memory we have of who shared them with us or where we had them. That is probably the most important thing. And like, I want to hear from you. Like, where do you have a favorite hard candy? Um, do you have a specific memory that you'd want to share with me, obviously? But let me know on social media or click the send us a text link in the show notes. I'm always, fascinated with what you guys like and experiences with those things. So please let me know. And with that, we add another stamp to our pop culture passport. I hope that this episode inspires you to get out and explore all that is quirky and cool, even in your own backyard. Please follow, download, and subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. Tell a friend and leave a review if you like what we're doing. It really does help the show to grow. You can follow me on Instagram or Facebook. Just search for The Roaming Yeti. Keep roaming and finding your fun.